So often when we talk about projections between people, it's really difficult to detect a projection. So one of the things that you can do to detect certain types of projections is use the triangle, the victim, savior, aggressor triangle. Triangle of projections is something that's very known in the social psychology world. And if we simplify it, it's basically like this. You have three different roles. You have, first of all, the victim. So we'll draw the victim here, the poor victim. And the victim, of course, needs a savior because somebody has to save. But then also the victim needs an aggressor. So let's look at the aggressor. Let's draw him with a sword here. The aggressor is the one attacking the victim. And the savior is, of course, the one that has the lovely role of saving. So savior. So victim, savior, aggressor work as a triangle because they all need each other to exist. And usually what happens is that they work in an unconscious cycle, that people don't often identify themselves as feeling like a victim, a savior, or an aggressor. They just project that onto somebody else. They say, this person has attacked me, or the aggressor says, this person is just being a wrong victim in some way and therefore justifying their aggression. And the savior is saying, well, this person needs me, so therefore I have to be a savior. So most of the time, you're not really conscious of that triangle. This is why we need to draw it out. So let's take an example. If you imagine this in the context of a British student going out for his gap year into Africa, let's say he goes out to Uganda and he's called David. So he's a student who decides to do something to help the world in between his final year of studies and university. And he's going in with an unconscious position of a savior. He goes to Uganda, he's a design student, and he's thinking that he's going to help. He's working under UNICEF as a collaboration with his university, and he goes out for a few months to try and design some solutions for health and sanitation in a town in Uganda. And what he does is that he's coming in with the status of savior, and he's projecting the idea that African, particularly children, are victims of the world economy or some other form of victimhood. And he goes into this town the first few days, and what's likely to happen is that he's going to be asked by somebody, give me, for example, your money for your daily allowance. Your daily allowance at the moment is probably enough to sustain my family, says the little boy he meets. And he gives him two choices. Unconsciously, he's saying, I'm a victim. Either save me and give your daily allowance, or don't, and you become an aggressor. You're an evil aggressor. So he's trapped in a triangle. And the only way to get out of it is to actually acknowledge that that's happening and that we're not really either of these roles. We're just projecting those roles onto each other. Now, imagine now the next step, that he in this project meets this beautiful young student from Kampala University, and they decide to even go home to England, to David's home, and get married. And he's getting married on the basis of being a savior and her victim, which is a dangerous way to start a relationship. But nevertheless, they get married, they go to England, and after a little while, the tables turn, which is what happens with this triangle. Tables turn. From the savior role, he actually becomes a bit of a victim of her, because he starts to say yes all the time. Every time she asks for something, he says yes. He never says no, because he's still feeling bad about her being a victim. Her, on the other hand, becomes the victim. From the victim, she becomes the aggressor, because at one point she gets fed up with him never saying no, and she starts to act up and go, well, sod this, I'm not really happy anymore, I want some change, and starts to boss him around. So from savior, he goes into victim, and from victim, she goes into aggressor. After a while, the tables turn again, and he goes from victim role into the aggressor role, because he's no longer happy in this relationship, and he decides to do something about it. So he divorces, and he then becomes the aggressor. So she feels bad that he's attacked him, and so divorced, in short. And from the role of aggressor, she could very well become a savior. She might even go home to Kampala and start a women's association to help divorcee women or something, to save poor victims that she has identified. And the cycle never ends. It's a cycle that you cannot stop. That's the reason why those projections are dangerous, is that you cannot actually get out of it. The minute you have a victim, you need a savior and you need an aggressor. Now, this plays out at every single level. It plays out at the individual level, but it also plays out at a society level. If you think of Finland, for example, if you think of which role Finland has played in history versus Russia and Sweden historically, there's definitely the same triangle playing out. You could see that Finland has been the victim of Russia and Sweden in turn. And the saviour could have been projected onto the role of, in the Second World War, the Allies. So this plays out individually, collectively. And if you talk to teenagers or kids about this, you can replace those three words by animals. Like, for example, the victim would be the little sheep, the aggressor is the wolf, and the saviour is the sheepdog. So either way you look at it, this triangle is a very dangerous triangle because it leads to eternal projections. And projections, as you know, is something that is destructive in relationships because you're no longer owning your feelings, needs, and behaviors because you're projecting them onto somebody else. So use this triangle to identify the minute you notice somebody or yourself playing victim, saviour, or aggressor, notice it and try and step out of it and go, well, actually, neither of these are true. These are just projections. What's actually going on is I have this need and that need. So that is the triangle of victim, saviour, aggressor.